Ok, clase. Ya revisamos el pretérito y el imperfecto. Hoy vamos a estudiar el pretérito contra el imperfecto, porque los dos tiempos son muy diferentes y necesitas saber cuándo usar el pretérito y cuándo usar el imperfecto. Primero, vamos a empezar con el pretérito. Usamos el pretérito para acciones que ocurrieran una vez y cuando las acciones ya se terminaron. También usamos el pretérito cuando sabemos el comienzo o el fin de una acción. Cuando hablamos sobre una serie de acciones, usamos el pretérito. Y por lo último, usamos el pretérito para hechos en el pasado. Okay, clase. So we're going to look at a couple of examples for each of the different uses of el pretérito. So I talked about 4 different uses, and so we'll look at each one of those in a little bit more detail. So the first use, el pretérito expresses one-time completed past actions. So here's the 2 examples I have. El lunes pasado hablé con mis amigos. Last Monday, I spoke with my friends. Here I am, expressing the fact that one time on Monday, I spoke with my friends, and that's completed now. Ayer fuimos al cine en la ciudad de San Pedro Sula. Yesterday, we went to the theater in the city of San Pedro Sula. Again, this is an action that happened one specific time yesterday, and is completed now. We also use el pretérito when we want to express the beginning or the end of an action. So, empecé a conducir a las 8 de la tarde. I started to drive at 8 o'clock in the evening. Since I'm telling you a specific time when I started doing something, I can really only start doing that action at that specific time one time, right? Terminé a estudiar a las 4:30. I finished studying at 4:30. Again, I can only finish doing an action at it exactly 4:30 one time. And so that's why I use the preterite, because the preterite is used for actions that only happened once. The preterite is also used to express a series of actions that happened in the past. So, for example, la semana pasada, mi hermano fue a la ciudad, compró una camisa y regresó a la casa. So last week, my brother went to the city, bought a shirt, and returned home. So these 3 verbs, fue, compró, regresó, went, bought, returned, they're all in the preterite because they're expressing a series of actions. El pretérito also expresses a fact. So if we want to talk about facts, that are about the past, then we're going to use el pretérito. So Simón Bolívar fue el presidente de Venezuela. Simon Bolivar was the president of Venezuela. He's not the president anymore, right? And so that's why we want to use el pretérito. He was. All right, so next I want to look at el imperfecto and explain to you when we would want to use the imperfect tense when we're talking about things that happened in the past. So we use the imperfect tense whenever we're talking about ongoing past actions, actions that were just happening for a long amount of time. We also use the imperfect for actions that don't have a specific beginning or an ending. So again, actions that were going on for a long time and we don't really know when they started or when they ended. We can use the imperfect when we want to describe how life used to be. So whenever you see that phrase used to, you would want to probably use the imperfect to describe how things used to be in the past. Whenever you're setting the scene for maybe a story, you would want to use the imperfect to describe what the scene was like before the actions started to happen. We use the imperfect tense for habitual or repetitive actions. So if you do actions out of habit, or if you repeat actions a lot and you're describing those actions, then you would use the imperfect tense. We usually use the imperfect tense when we're describing emotions and feelings, although, of course, none of these rules are hard, fast rules. There's always going to be exceptions. There are actually times when you could describe your emotions and feelings using the preterite tense if you're talking about a very specific emotion that you felt at a very specific time and that only lasted for a specific amount of time. And then the last thing we use the imperfect tense for is when we're telling time in the past. Okay, so let's look at some of the uses for el imperfecto in a little bit more detail. So el imperfecto expresses an ongoing past action with no specified beginning or ending. So when we read this sentence, Cuando Anita era niña, ella jugaba en el parque. Since we see that jugar has been conjugated in the imperfect tense, we're going to know that this was an ongoing action. So Anita played in the park, a lot of different times as a child, and we don't really know when she started playing in the park or when she ended her playing in the park. We can also use el imperfecto when we want to describe how life used to be. So en el pasado, las personas caminaban en las calles. So in the past, people walked in the streets. Again, really no specific time frame on when people did that. It's just describing how things used to be, and so we use the imperfect tense to do that. El imperfecto also helps set the scene. So whenever you're trying to describe the people and places and things that are like in a story, and you're trying to set the scene, you're going to use el imperfecto. So la casa era roja y pequeña y tenía dos pisos. The house was red and small and had 2 stories. El imperfecto expresses repetitive or habitual actions in the past. So mamá siempre preparaba la cena a las 6:30. Because you see the clue word siempre, which is always, and you see preparaba, which is in the imperfect tense, we know that this is an action that the mother in this sentence did repetitively. She did it multiple times. If we said ayer, mamá preparó la cena a las 6:30, we would read that as yesterday, mother prepared dinner at 6:30, and we would use the preterite tense because that's something that she did specifically yesterday, just one time. And the last 2 uses that we're going to learn today for el imperfecto describes emotions and feelings in the past. So tú estabas muy triste. We would want to use the imperfect tense to say you were very sad. Yo estaba muy cansada después de clase. I was very tired after class. Like I said, there's a very few times when we would want to use el pretérito to describe our emotions. One example would be yo estuve enojado en el momento. So I'll put that over here on the side. Yo estuve. So I was, but I'm using the preterite form of the verb estar. Yo estuve enojado en el momento. I was angry in the moment. So because I'm talking about a very specific time frame when I was angry, and I'm wanting whoever I'm telling that to know that I was only mad then and I'm not mad anymore. So it's a completed past action. I would use the preterite tense. So there's obviously other situations where you would use the preterite tense to talk about emotions too. But most of the time, you'll just use the imperfect tense. El imperfecto also expresses time in the past, and you always do that. So you could say, eran las 8:30 cuando llegamos al aeropuerto. It was 8:30 when we arrived to the airport, or era la 1 en punto. So it was exactly 1 o'clock. Another thing that's really important to know is the preterite and the imperfect can actually be used in the same sentence as well. So they don't have to be, in their own separate sentences. Sometimes you'll want to express something and you need to use the preterite and the imperfect in the same sentence. So when that's happening, just keep in mind, el pretérito is telling what one-time action happened in that sentence. And el imperfecto is telling what else was going on in the background when that action happened. So here's an example. Toda la familia comía cuando Enrique entró en el restaurante. So all of the family was eating when Enrique entered the restaurant. So the family was eating. That was an ongoing action. So there's no really beginning or end time for that. It's just an unspecified amount of time. But when Enrique entered, that was a one-time action that happened. It was kind of like all of a sudden that action happened, and it only happened once. He didn't enter the restaurant multiple times. So that's why comía is in the imperfect tense and entró is in the preterite tense. Here are some of the preterite clue words. When you see these words in a sentence, it will kind of give you a hint or a clue that you're probably going to see verbs that are in the preterite, or it might even give you a hint that you should use a preterite verb in the sentence. So for example, anoche is last night, ayer, yesterday, ayer, the day before yesterday, el lunes pasado, the last Monday, la semana pasada, the last week, el año pasado, the last year, el mes pasado, the last month, and then ya, that's just a phrase that you use if you want to say that something's already been done. So I could say, ya hablé con mi maestro. I already talked to my teacher. People also will say yeah, like kind of as a way to be like, stop bothering me, yeah, like already, like I'm done with you. And here are some of the imperfect clue words that I want to show you. Again, when you see these in a sentence, you'll know that the imperfect tense is probably going to be used or that it needs to be used. So siempre is always. If you're talking about things that you always did, you'd want to use the imperfect tense because they're probably actions that happened repeatedly or were ongoing. Con frecuencia, frequently. Frecuentemente also means frequently. A veces, sometimes. Muchas veces, many times. Cada mes, each month. Todos los días. Whenever you see todos, that's a clue word for the imperfect. Todos los días, every day. Todos los años, every year. Todas las semanas, every week. Or cuando era un niño or una niña, when I was a child. Those are all phrases that are clue words for the imperfect tense.